Hi guys, this is going to be another step in the process of getting ready for doing some urban landscape gardening. Today what we're going to do is basically we're just going to clean up the yard and prep the spaces for the bed laying steps. I'm just going to post some maybe 3 to 4 quick little videos on just how to do some basic pruning on things in your yard. You just want to clean up any of the debris from the winter, any excess leaves, sticks that have fallen. I have some rocks in my yard from last year when we were building some stuff I need to get out of the way. And you're just going to go through and assess the rest of your yard and those areas since we're doing some cleanup. So one thing when you're going through and you're pruning out in the springtime, you want to make sure that you're pruning correctly. There's a couple of things that you should just generally know. You should know where nodes are, where buds are, where basically just new growth is coming out. And you should also know if you have a flowering plant, if it's an early spring flowering plant or not. Because if it's an early spring flowering plant, you don't want to prune it yet because essentially you'll be pruning off a lot of the blooms. This would be something typical here in Virginia of like a dogwood. They typically bloom earlier in the spring. You don't want to cut off those buds because then you'll have areas of the tree that will just not have any flowers on it. It'll just look a little weird. So I'm just going to show you real quick here sort of some terminology, a little bit of plant science, and then I'll show you some correct pruning. If you've ever seen a plant that looks like this and you've wondered what the heck is going on here, why is it that my plants only grow these long, spindly portions on the top? This is basically due to apical dominance. That's what we call it, and really what that means is that the plant is exuding a hormone that is suppressing the lower branches from growing. So what you end up with is a plant that has really tall, reaching, long branches or portions on the top, and the lower growth is not growing as fast or as much as that top portion. In this picture, I want you to notice the circle there in the center of the picture. And this circle is around what we would call a node. And what a node really is a point of growth. And these can look like buds, they can look like branches, they can even look like a thorn. A thorn is a modified node. And you can see that here in the picture where the red arrow is. Now, back in the circle there, you see a little bud. That's an auxiliary bud. And basically, an auxiliary bud is in the axil of two branches. And here in this picture, you can see there is a branch going up and then a branch going or continuing down. And so the axil is sort of like the armpit of two branches, so that's why it's called an auxiliary bud. Now that you know what a node is, I also want you to look at this picture and realize that there are spaces in between the nodes, and those are called internodes. And they're actually very important as well. What they do is they will space out the growth of the plant proportionally, and this really is an effective way for the plant to regulate its growth and to be able to really function properly. So you might be wondering, so what? What's the big deal? Well, it's really important to be able to identify these areas of potential growth or new growth that may already be happening on your plants. This is important because If you understand this correctly, you can use this information to be able to manipulate your plants so that you can accomplish different outcomes that may, for example, be able to produce more fruit for you, or larger fruit for you, or more blooms for you. So just keep in mind where these points of new growth are on your plants when you're taking care of them. This last picture is really just a recap of everything that we've already stated. So you can see with the buds themselves that there is a really large bud. That is apical dominance. Again, that bud came out first and it is suppressing the growth of the smaller auxiliary buds below it that you can see in the armpit or the axil of that particular node. You can see it on the buds below as well. There's a large one and then successive smaller ones below it. And on this one you can really see the nodes versus the internodes. So, when you're looking at your plants, you can really take this information and use it to your advantage to become more fruitful with your plants in different ways. So, we've talked about all of these plant science ideas and concepts about how the plant regulates its growth and the specific parts of the plant that we can manipulate. So how does that relate to pruning? Well, since we know where new points of growth would be or could be, when we're taking pieces off of a plant, we want to make sure that we're as close to that new point of growth as possible. Because what's going to happen is, just like we scab over our wounds, our bodies do that, the plant does the same thing. And what it causes the plant to do when you cut off excessively far out from a node, it keeps trying to scab over that area, and it keeps expending extra energy to try to cap off that decaying area. Whereas if you cut closer to the node, it's going to take less time for that plant to seal off that area. And so it expends less energy, and then new growth will form around the closest node to wherever you've made that cut. So now I know you're like, great, more information, right? How does that relate to our urban landscape gardening? Well, for example, if you have a tomato plant, if you've ever grown tomato plants before, you'll realize that off of the main stalk and in between the lateral branches, you'll notice that you'll get some extra growth. Again, that's in the auxiliary bud, or in the axil, and it is the auxiliary bud. Well, you have an option. You can pinch those off, or essentially prune those auxiliary buds off, and have your fruit concentrated on just the lateral branches. You have another option. You can wait till they get big enough, strong enough to support themselves, and then you can root those and have a successive planting instead of starting from seed again. And then you also have the option to just leave them there. And it will depend on the variety of tomato that you have. If you have a cherry tomato, for example, it may not matter because it's an indeterminate tomato, and you want more branches because then it can hold more fruit. But for instance, if you have a beef master or a brandy wine, you may want to go ahead and cut those auxiliary buds off, because then more of the energy of the plant is going to go to those lateral branches, and you'll get larger tomatoes on those laterals. So, this is what I urge you to do this year. If you've never done it before, I urge you to experiment. A garden is a great place to experiment ideas and test out new ways of doing things, and you can really start to understand how to manipulate these plants that produce your vegetables for you to really get them to do what you want them to do. And you're going to find that as you do that, you're going to be able to either increase your yield or increase the quality of the yield that you already have. So have fun.